Afro Tales podcast is a part of the Connected Podcast Network.
Ahoy, my friends. Welcome aboard the Afro Tales podcast. I'm your storyteller, Aman Mazinga. Join me as we explore the tales that grew from the people of Indigenous and African descent in the Americas and the Caribbean.
After, come and see me, chef, who will impart upon you a recipe for the story you have just heard.
So with no further ado, let us set sail on this new age of exploration. La Diablesse. Long, long ago, on the Caribbean island of Martinique, the French still ruled and Creole was the spoken word. It emerged from the rich medley of French and African languages created by the enslaved Africans. On this picturesque island, the mountains would erupt and lava would flow freely into the valleys, burying everything in its wake. Hurricanes would rampage through villages, wiping our factories and ripping up trees. With all of these violent horrors lurking around the villages, it may surprise you to know who they feared most. La Diablesse. Some people said that she was a she-devil, a Jumbi, with a disfigured foot that resembles a hoof. Others said she was a witch, roaming the highways alone, waiting to cast her vengeful spells on unsuspecting men. Everyone said to watch out, beware, and be on your guard for strangers in your village. The story goes that on one typically blazing hot day, people were stretched out on their verandas, sighing in the shade, watching nothing. Imagine a day so hot that even the air is languid, where each breath you take is slow and dragging movement. Two young men, Kabenla and Ekoux, were sitting outside of their boarding house. They stopped for lunch after working all morning at the sugar factory and sat staring into the distance, watching nothing in particular. The sweet scent of mango hung in the air from trees dotted around the houses. Goats ambled across the paths, nibbling at leaves and long grass. Kabenla, you notice how quiet it is today? Ekoux nudged his friend. Even though it was the middle of the day, with sunlight exposing every living thing, Ekoux felt a darkness creeping up around him. He glanced around. He had a sense of something was not quite right. Houses seemed hushed into silence with the shutters closed up. Trees appeared monstrous behind him. Terror swaying with each branch. Kabenla, do you hear me? Ekoux asked his friend again. Ease me, Ekoux. Can't you see I'm busy? Ekoux followed Kabenla's gaze. Seemingly out of nowhere in the brilliant light of day, a tall, slender woman was striding through the village. Her pace was at odds with the sluggish heat of the day. Her long arms swayed back and forth, driving her body forward. Her colorful clothes draped unnaturally around her body. Stiff and lifeless. She wore a short-sleeved blouse with a long madras skirt that fell rigid to the ground. Glimpses of her white ruffled petticoat could be seen as she glided along. Her face was partially hidden by a wide-brimmed straw hat. She was dark, swaying, and heading their way. Look at her hips, are swaying. You see her eyes? Kabenla said in a daze. It's true. She did have the most exquisite-looking eyes, but they were not welcoming. They were cold and glassy, set deep into her face like obsidian rock. She went past the boarding house. Bonjour, Missy. Hello, sir. She nodded firmly without stopping. Bonjour, madame. Hello, madame, Kabenla replied. He jumped up from his seat and quickly fell in step with her. You look as sweet as molasses, he said with a wide grin. She did not reply or even look at him. And so it begins again, she sighed to herself. She was used to getting unwanted attention from men. At first, she felt flattered by it. As she traveled from village to village, seeking a new home after the loss of her own, men would compliment her, offer her work on their land, even appear to befriend her. She had been naive, but now she could exact her revenge. She carried on striding while Kabenla carried on talking. I've never seen you here before. Kikote Usoti? Where are you from? Affairs of the chicken are not affairs of the goat, she replied, keeping her dark eyes facing straight ahead. She thought Kabenla was the same as all the others before him, the ones who would look right through her clothes to her dark naked skin, the ones who would undress her in their mind as they followed her every move. Why so serious? Kabenla wanted to know. I am in mourning. I died long ago. Perhaps she was just joking or trying to shock. Either way, Kabenla took no notice. Would you like some company? He offered, puffing up his chest. She stopped and stared at him for the first time. Before climbing up a tree, make sure you can climb down. Her tone was not unfriendly and yet not quite inviting. Under the brim of her hat, he saw his reflection in her eyes. Those dark eyes. I'm walking up high where the cinnamon spices grow, and the rainfall is plenty. Her voice seemed to soar right into the mountains when she spoke. Kabenla knew that she was heading far away from his village. He'd never make it back in time for his afternoon shift at the factory. He turned back to look at his friend. Ekoux was shaking his head and waving his arms, signaling for Kabenla to return. For some reason unknown to him, Kabenla felt compelled to go with this woman. He was captivated by her. Instead of heading back to his friend at the boarding house, he followed her right out of the village. They walked along the road from Balata, a path that twisted and turned with the barks of the trees. Iguanas were lazing across the branches, and Manacles sniffed the grass with their long snouts. No other living person was around. They were completely alone. She marched on and kept steady pace. Without looking back, Kabenla struggled to keep up with her. Sweat dripping from his brow and his white shirt clung to his chest. He was used to this moist heat, but it seemed as if they had been walking for hours. He tried again to spark up conversation. Kijanu, really? What is your name?
Feodidi.
Yes, she said. Her dimples deepened, barely concealing a smile.
Mary.
No.
Isabel.
No.
Isaroa.
You will never guess.
I give up.
Kabenla was out of breath. The air felt thin. They were high in the mountains now. Even though he was tired, he wanted to climb with her forever. She was walking faster, with no trace of tiredness or discomfort. Her long, brightly colored skirt dragged over the rocks. She was slightly ahead of him, just out of sight. He followed the sound of her ruffled petticoats. The smell of sweet cinnamon hung from the leaves. They must be close, he thought. Feeling a rush of dizzying excitement, he did not notice the darkness creeping in all around them. Earlier that afternoon, Ekoux had returned to work at the factory and was disappointed that Kabenla had left him to it. I can't believe he's run off to chase a bit of skirt, he grumbled to his friends. They laughed, accusing him of being jealous. After all, if a tall, striking woman spoke to them, who would not follow her? They worked until early evening. Once the sun had been swallowed up by the darkness, Ekoux headed home, wondering what tall tales his friends would conjure up for his absence. I bet he will say she kept him captive and wouldn't let him go. He laughed to himself, preparing to listen to all kinds of outlandish stories of how Kabenla had spent his afternoon while the rest of them were working hard. Back at the boarding house, he expected to see his friend sitting with his feet up on the veranda, sipping a bottle of beer, ready to boast about his afternoon. But Ekoux approached the steps. There was no sign of him sitting outside. The trees swayed gently, whispering all around him. The air felt lighter than it had today. Gone was the peculiar feeling of terror that he'd felt earlier. Perhaps Kabenla was hiding in his room. Ekoux knocked on the door. Hey man, what are you playing at? Where have you been? He waited for a reply or some movement from inside, but heard no answer. He pushed the door open and saw the room was empty. Perhaps he was helping to prepare dinner. He heard the sound of bowls being scraped and lids being placed onto clay pots. The smell of conch stew with onions and spices grabbed him. He realized he was hungry and needed to eat. He entered the kitchen and his grumbling grew to worry when there was no sign of Kabenla. They never missed a meal together. He ate quickly and decided to ask around. No one seemed worried. He's a grown man, What are you worrying about? Fear crept over Ekoux, as it was not like his friend to disappear for this long. He strolled outside and wandered around, asking anyone he saw if they knew where he had gone. Bonsoir. Good evening. Have you seen my friend Kabenla? About this tall, wearing a white shirt like mine? He gesticulated wildly to neighbors in the village. He was with a tall, elegant woman, a stranger. He walked off with her at lunchtime, explained Ekoux. No one took any notice except an elderly man who had been liming on the side of the road for most of the afternoon. He shook his head solemnly and asked Ekoux,
Was the woman quite tall and walking fast?
Yes, and she had a large straw hat. Did you see them? He asked again.
No,
he replied. Ekoux turned to leave.
It sounds like La Diablesse.
He stuttered loudly. Still shaking his head, Ekoux had run out of patience and was about to curse the man.
Listen to me. La Diablesse is the she-devil who haunts these mountain roads. If your friend left with her, you might never see him again.
Ekoux had heard these tall tales before, but didn't want to believe them. They were stories told to frighten and keep you from trusting strangers.
There's no way a Jumbi spirit showed up in the broad daylight,
yelled Ekoux. The old man shook his head again.
Don't be so sure, young man. Some terrors appear right beside us in the day.
He shuffled off and left Ekoux wondering if there were any truth to these stories. Up in the mountains, the sun disappeared beneath the trees long ago, allowing the darkness to leap out. One minute, Kabenla was scrambling along the rocky path, following the stranger's shapely silhouette, and then suddenly he was plunged into darkness.
Where are you? I can't see you,
he cried out. He wasn't usually a fearful man, but he knew it was dangerous to be stumbling around at night. The night critters grew louder and he felt them close. She had not slowed down. She kept moving. He couldn't understand how she was able to navigate so deftly when he couldn't even see his own hands in front of his face. He reached out for her and lost his balance. She smiled in the darkness, surprised he had kept up with her for so long. She used to wait until they pounced, when their appetite overcame their senses. She could see it in their eyes. Now, she didn't wait. She pounced first.
So every wind, follow my voice,
she cried out. In the darkness, he heard her chant. The words rose up from her belly and clawed their way through her throat. He couldn't understand them, but he felt their power. Her voice thundered into the night.
Akweba, Akweba, mi dende, obonson. Akweba, Akweba, mi dende, obonson.
As she chanted, a violent gust of wind swirled around them. The shadows sank their teeth into his bones.
Are you scared?
Her voice was mocking. A chill crept up his spine. He suddenly felt like a spell was broken. He no longer found her captivating. He thought she was terrifying. Take my hand. She reached out and touched him. Her hand felt like stone, cold and bloodless.
Vine, come.
she ordered. Reluctantly, he followed her. She turned to look at him, half lit by the moonlight. He saw a wretched expression on her face. Everything was contorted. Her eyes flared with hell's fury. Her mouth gnarled and twisted like a tiger with its prey. He shrieked and shrank back further, moving away from her towards the cliff edge. His feet slipped in the dirt. He tried to lurch forward, but he lost his grip and fell swiftly over the edge. An empty cry came from his lips as he hit the rocks 2,000 feet below. No one heard him except La Diablesse. There, in the moonlight, you could see the imprint of her hoof mark in the dirt as she shuffled away. Wow. So that was another great story coming out of the book Caribbean Folk Tales, Stories from the Islands of the Windrush Generation by Wendy Shearer. And if she doesn't know, or if somebody hasn't told her, that I love her stories and I love sharing the stories that she puts into these books, please do so for me. La Diablesse or La Diablesse, depending on where you are from in the Caribbean, is how you pronounce her. Like the story says, it means she is a she-devil, a demon. If you were to translate the au bon sens, the story, like most folk tales, basically give you everything you need. And it seems that in Caribbean folk tales, their message was right up and in your face. Don't trust strangers. Okay? If there's a new person in town, if there are people that you've never seen before, don't trust them. You know? Approach them with caution. Approach them with a skeptic mind on what they're saying, what they're doing there. You know, don't necessarily attack them. Don't try to throw them out because they may be good people, but don't be gullible enough to just trust everything they say. You know, and it makes sense for the spirit to come from the Caribbean, because all ethnicities that were, either already in the Caribbean or, the Africans that were enslaved and brought to the Caribbean all have that same fear of the stranger. For those that were already there, the stranger came in on the boat and destroyed their people, destroyed their cultures, destroyed their livelihoods. For the enslaved, the strangers came in and stole them from their homeland. And I know what people are going to say, that a lot of Africans were captured by, other Africans. Yes, but that doesn't mean that they knew the other people that were coming and captured them. Very few, probably were captured actually by somebody they know, like the story Let Me Fly, that I did recently. But most were captured in war parties, kidnapped, and taken from their homes by strangers, whether if they were the same color skin as them or of another hue. So I get it, but I also think the story says know your limitations. Kabenla fought against his own nature, his own thought process, his own limitations, just to follow this person. And because he thought she was beautiful, even though he could barely see her face, she was unique, she was exotic, let's say that. And it was his demise. because of him. You know? I think that a lot of us tend to, fall into that trap. Not necessarily to our death, but to a demise per se. You know, it might be detrimental to us financially, emotionally, even physically in some senses. It may put us in a situation in life that we never wanted to be in. Following that person, falling for that person, falling for that stranger, falling for that other, could have put you into a situation, Okay? Well, go see Chef. He has a wonderful recipe inspired by the region and the story that you have just heard. And until we meet again, thank you for coming on this journey with me. As always, have a blessed day. Enjoy the spooky season. Until next time.
Welcome, my friends, to the Galley. I am your chef, and today we have a wonderful recipe inspired by the story you have just heard. Today, we shall be creating Accras de Morue, or Cod Fritters. Now, what will we need for this fantastically delicious recipe? 400 grams of desalted cod, 300 grams of flour, 250 milliliters of water, 1 teaspoon of baking soda or baking powder, half an onion, 1 large clove of garlic peeled, parsley or country onion, 1 West Indian pepper plus a small glass of water, half a lime, salt and pepper, and frying oil. Now, how do we put this together? Easy. In a salad bowl, finely crumble the desalted cod. By hand or using a fork, finely chop the onion, parsley, country onion, and peeled garlic. Add the spice mixture to the cod. Mix salt and pepper. In a bowl, prepare the fritter dough. In a bowl, prepare the fritter dough. Pour in the flour. Make a well and pour half of the water into the center to start. Mix gently, then gradually pour in the remaining water. You should obtain a semi-thick paste, thickness of a thick cream. If the paste seems too liquid, add a little flour. If it is too thick, dilute with a little water. Now, add the cod spice mixture to the dough. Crush the West Indian pepper in a small glass of water. This water will spice up the dough just the right amount. Add 1 to 3 teaspoons or more depending on your taste. At this stage, you could taste the dough to check for the seasoning. Finally, add 1 teaspoon of baking soda and squeeze the juice of half a lemon over it. An emulsion will form. Gently incorporate it into the dough to make it swell, all in like this. Now, in a saute pan, heat the oil over medium-high heat. Spoon the batter into small donuts, and you will cook on each side. When the akras are golden, remove them with a skimmer or a kitchen spider. Let the akras drain on absorbent paper. Serve the Cod Fritters piping hot as an aperitif or as an accompaniment to raw vegetables for an authentic exotic starter. And that is it, my friends. Now, go make this recipe yours. And until we have another wonderful recipe, remember the story of La Diablesse and what to watch out for. So until next time, my friends, as always, enjoy!
Thank you, my friends, for coming on this voyage. Thanks to Art by Chalet for the logo, episode, and shirt designs. You can get t-shirts and other items on tpublic.com. You can contact me on all socials at AfroTalesCast. That's AfroTalesCast. And email me at AfroTalesCast@gmail.com. You may also become a benefactor by simply sharing with any and everyone, giving a thumbs up, a 5-star rating and review in your podcast app of choice, or simply donating on Patreon or Ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. So until we meet again, may your winds be fair and your seas follow.